Okay, tonight we were not just opening a file from the past, we were stepping into a silence that has lasted almost half a century. On the empty backroads of Ontario, a secret was buried, a secret that refused to speak for decades. It is not only a story of murder, but of time itself holding its breath. Welcome to Criminal Mindcast, the podcast where we tell true crime stories, not just with facts, but with silence, with the haunting weight of what was never said. We walk carefully between evidence and absence, between what the record reveals and what the shadows keep hidden. Tonight, we turn to a case that haunted a small Canadian town for 45 years. A young woman's disappearance, a community's fear, and a mystery that resisted resolution until science gave the dead a new voice. In the late 1970s, Ontario still held the rhythm of quiet rural towns. Life was measured by familiar routines, neighbors greeting each other at the corner store, children walking to school along gravel roads, and families sitting on porches as the evening cooled. In places like this, people assumed safety was woven into the fabric of daily life. A stranger's presence was immediately noticed. Whispers traveled faster than any official announcement. Secrets rarely stayed secret for long. Yet behind this intimacy lay another truth. When darkness entered such a community, it cut deeper because the violence touched everyone at once. The victim in this case was a young woman from a quiet rural town in Ontario. She was not wealthy, not celebrated, and not someone whose name carried far beyond her community. She was part of the ordinary rhythm of small-town life, and perhaps that ordinariness made her loss even more piercing. Like many young women, she carried modest hopes, an education to pursue, steady work to secure, and family bonds that grounded her days while also shaping her struggles. To the larger world, her life might have seemed unremarkable, but within the intimate orbit of her town, she mattered deeply. On the night she disappeared, what was left behind was not just her absence, but the unraveling of daily life. A chair sat empty at dinner, a voice went unheard, routines dissolved into silence. That silence expanded with time until it became a permanent void no one could fill. Psychological profiles created years later described her killer as a man shaped by obsession. He was not imagined as a figure of sudden rage, but of control, someone who rehearsed his desires before acting upon them. In forensic psychology, we often describe this pattern as compulsive orchestration, the deliberate creation of a scenario where the victim is not simply chosen, but trapped. This form of predation is chilling, not because it erupts without reason, but because it is staged with patience. Every detail, the time, the location, the vulnerability, was calculated to ensure mastery. What makes small-town murders uniquely haunting is how the predator often blends into the very community he violates. He might be the man who exchanged polite greetings at the grocery store, or the face seen at church gatherings. Unlike anonymous crimes in sprawling cities, rural violence often emerges from familiarity, not distance. This paradox, that danger can grow from within the safe circle, destroys the psychological security of a town more thoroughly than any outsider ever could. Those who knew the victim described her as approachable, friendly but occasionally withdrawn. Behind her kindness lay struggles she rarely voiced, fragments of personal conflict or emotional burden that others sensed but did not name. Many women of her generation carried these silent battles, bound by expectations of resilience and discretion. The unspoken becomes significant because predators are adept at sensing vulnerability. They exploit the weight people already carry, turning it into a lever for control. In this way, her private silences may have made her more visible to someone hunting for weakness. Family and community histories matter in crimes like this. A town that celebrates intimacy also enforces conformity. Everyone knows one another's parents, one another's past mistakes, and one another's reputations. In such an environment, shame is magnified, secrets are precious, and trust is fragile. For a predator, this environment is fertile ground. The ability to mask cruelty behind ordinary appearances is easier when suspicion naturally avoids those who appear familiar. To outsiders, this contradiction might seem strange, but in criminology we often see how killers thrive by constructing masks of normalcy precisely where people least expect deception. As the years passed, locals remembered not just the victim, but the fracture her disappearance caused. Parents warned daughters not to walk home alone. Families reinforced routines. Conversations turned inward, with people questioning whether they ever truly knew their neighbors. A small-town murder became more than a crime. It became a permanent shadow. Every time someone locked a door earlier than before, every time a glance lingered suspiciously on a stranger, her absence was present again. From a psychological standpoint, the killer's behavior reflects both trauma and pathology. Offenders who act with obsession often display a need to reclaim power they feel was once denied to them. This can stem from childhood neglect, abuse, or humiliation. By targeting a young woman in his own community, he enacted not just violence, but a symbolic rewriting of his personal narrative. In harming her, he temporarily inverted the powerlessness that once defined him. Such acts are rarely about the victim as an individual, they are about the predator's internal void. She became, in effect, a canvas for his unresolved rage and fractured identity. The victim must never be reduced to a symbol. She was not a character in someone else's psychological theater, but a daughter, a friend, and a life deeply needed. Her absence was not an abstract detail, but an enduring grief carried by those she loved. To study the offender's mind is also to face the psychology of the bereaved, where trauma ripples outward, reshaping community bonds. Over decades, she became both memory and myth, a frozen image of innocence interrupted, and a ghost haunting collective conscience. For her family, she remains a wound that never heals. For the town, she is a reminder of vulnerability, a name invoked whenever safety is questioned. In unsolved murders, victims linger in both mourning and imagination. In the end, the background of this story is not only about one young woman's life and one man's darkness. It is about the fragile threads binding communities, the ease with which trust can be betrayed, and the way violence turns ordinary places into haunted landscapes. The Ontario town where she lived was never the same, not because of what people saw, but because of what they could never again unsee. That safety once shattered cannot be easily restored. The timeline of the Ontario murder unfolds like a trail of faint echoes, moments recorded, yet never fully grasped. As investigators reconstructed the days before the young woman vanished, only fragments emerged, each one troubling in hindsight. Neighbors remembered details that once seemed inconsequential: a stranger's eyes lingering too long, a car that did not belong parked repeatedly at a rural intersection, a presence hovering at the margins of their quiet routines. At the time, no one recognized these fragments as warnings, but together they painted a picture of an unseen threat circling closer. In the final days, unease shadowed the victim. A friend recalled her saying she felt watched, as if someone trailed her steps. Another noted her hesitation to walk home after dusk, her instincts stirred by shadows that seemed heavier than usual. These subtle signals, dismissed then, became ominous markers later. Predators often hover at the edges, rehearsing control before striking. Her last sighting came on a country road she had traveled countless times. For most, those roads represented safety. But that night, silence betrayed her. She was seen moving quickly, unaware she was walking into the darkness that would claim her. Her disappearance was immediate in its impact. When she failed to return home, her family's concern escalated from unease to dread within hours. Unlike urban cases, where absence might be explained by distance or anonymity, small-town disappearances ring louder. Families call neighbors, neighbors call the police, and within a short span, an entire community becomes mobilized. Search parties combed the familiar trails and fields, flashlights pierced through forests. Farmers joined officers to scan ditches and fences, yet the night swallowed every clue. Days later, the search ended in devastation. Her body was discovered in an area not far from where she was last seen. The scene told a story, but only in fragments. There were signs of struggle, though faint. The earth held impressions, but not enough to reconstruct the sequence of violence. The autopsy confirmed homicide, but the manner left questions unanswered. She had been silenced in a way that erased more than it revealed. Forensic work in the 1970s was limited. Fibers, fluids, and trace materials were often lost, mishandled, or impossible to test. What today might be a map of DNA and timelines was then reduced to blurred outlines. The timeline following her death became one of diminishing possibilities. In the first weeks, investigators built theories quickly. They traced her last movements, spoke to those who had seen her walking, and attempted to link the suspicious sightings with potential suspects. But each lead dissolved under scrutiny. The vehicle seen near the intersection belonged to a traveling salesman, quickly cleared. The man whose gaze disturbed neighbors provided an alibi. The whispers of unusual behavior folded back into the ordinary rhythms of rural life, leaving nothing concrete. Months became years, and the crime settled into silence. The file remained open, but activity waned. Each anniversary marked another failure, another reminder that time was not working in favor of truth. Witnesses grew older, memories blurred, and evidence remained locked in boxes where technology could not yet unlock its secrets. For the victim's family, every passing year became both a wound and a prison. The uncertainty was worse than answers, because it meant grief never resolved into conclusion. From a criminological perspective, the gaps in the timeline illustrate a common pattern in small-town murders. Predators exploit transitional spaces, roads, fields, isolated paths. Knowing these areas lack surveillance, lack crowds, and lack the noise that might interrupt an attack. The Ontario victim's last steps occurred in such a liminal space where private life meets wilderness, where control is easier to seize. Psychologically, these liminal zones become stages for dominance, the predator turning open landscapes into cages. The discovery of the body raised more questions than it answered. Why there? Why then? Forensic psychologists suggest that killers often return victims to places that hold symbolic meaning for them, whether from childhood, work, or unresolved trauma. The field where she was found may have been chosen for its privacy, but it may also have been part of the killer's personal geography. Such choices are rarely random. They speak to the inner cartography of the offender's mind, a place where landscapes and memory intertwine. Despite interviews, tips, and speculation, no solid suspect ever emerged. In some cases, police focused too heavily on individuals who fit superficial profiles: the loner, the man with a temper, the drifter. But without physical evidence, suspicion could not transform into prosecution. The investigations slowed. Files gathered dust. What began as urgency faded into bureaucracy. The town, once galvanized by fear, adjusted by forgetting. Yet forgetting did not erase the wound. It only buried it deeper. Decades later, with the arrival of new forensic tools, the timeline was opened once more. DNA once considered unusable now carried promise. Old samples, carefully preserved though fragile, were tested again. The body's silent evidence, stored in boxes for years, seemed to whisper anew. With modern eyes, investigators reassembled the fragments. The unsettling stairs, the lonely walk down a rural road, the body found in a field, and a clearer story emerged, one that had always existed, waiting to be uncovered. Her murder timeline is more than a list of dates. It is a reflection on time itself. Every hour between her disappearance and discovery gained unbearable weight. Each passing year became part of the crime's shadow. This case was never paused by time. It was shaped and deepened by it. The murder timeline, incomplete and fragile, became a riddle suspended in silence. For 45 years, it remained unsolved, a story without closure, a puzzle missing its final piece. And yet, it endured. The endurance itself mattered, because it meant the question never disappeared. Who did this, and why? Those two questions remained alive long after the victim's voice was gone. They were the heartbeat of the case, pulsing beneath the silence, refusing to let the town completely forget. The investigation opened with urgency. Ontario Police mobilized quickly after the young woman's body was found. Detectives retraced her final steps, canvassed neighbors, and collected every account of the night she vanished. For a brief moment, the town believed answers would soon come. In communities that small, crimes rarely linger unsolved, and there was faith that determination would prevail. Yet limitations surfaced almost immediately. In the late 1970s, investigators leaned on witness memory, circumstantial details, and instinct. Without advanced forensics, their efforts quickly collided with barriers science had not yet overcome. Conflicting theories fractured the search. Some officers argued the killer was a local man, familiar with the victim's routines and perhaps harboring obsession. Others suggested a stranger, someone passing through rural Ontario who struck by chance. Both scenarios seemed plausible, but without evidence to close the gap, speculation only multiplied. Each lead produced more questions than clarity, scattering the focus of the case. Suspicion soon fixed on a man loosely tied to the victim. He lingered within her orbit, close enough to notice but never intimate. Police shadowed him, staged interactions, and interrogated him repeatedly, hoping for a misstep. But he remained steady, revealing nothing conclusive. Without physical proof, suspicion became frustration. His name spread in whispers across the community, but the law remained powerless. Physical evidence proved the investigation's greatest weakness. Potentially vital items were mishandled or rendered meaningless by the limits of the era. Fingerprints blurred beyond use, fibers lacked distinctiveness, and biological traces degraded before technology could unlock their story. Each failure silenced a possible answer. In hindsight, modern DNA analysis might have exposed the killer decades earlier. Instead, opportunity slipped away and silence prevailed. Witness testimonies offered only fragments. A farmer recalled seeing an unfamiliar car parked near the airport road. A woman remembered a figure lingering by the highway, half hidden in the dark. Another described a man whose stare felt heavy, though she could not describe his face with precision. None of these accounts aligned neatly. Each was a shard of glass, sharp but incomplete, never fusing into a whole. In the absence of consistency, doubt overshadowed every clue. Memory, already fragile, became unreliable as days stretched into months. As official progress faltered, the media filled the vacuum. Newspapers across Ontario seized the story with relentless intensity, transforming a private tragedy into a public spectacle. Headlines screamed of terror in paradise, painting rural fields as corridors of danger. Journalists spun narratives of stalkers, strangers, and hidden predators. The victim's name became a symbol, not only of loss, but of vulnerability. With every article, the island of calm that small-town Ontario once embodied was reshaped into a landscape of fear. The frenzy grew louder as months passed. Reporters speculated on motives, suspects, and police failures. Television crews filmed grieving relatives, searching faces for drama. The absence of resolution became part of the story itself. The longer the silence stretched, the more haunting it became. The killer's invisibility was amplified by headlines, turning him into less of a man and more of a myth. The Ontario Strangler, or so some dubbed him, became a figure larger than fact, an archetype of evil lurking just beyond the edge of the familiar. For the community, the effect was suffocating. Fear settled into the daily rhythms of life. Women altered routines, refusing to walk alone at night. Families locked doors with new caution, and parents whispered warnings to children. Strangers in town were no longer curiosities, but threats. The murders had reshaped not only public behavior, but the collective psyche. Safety was no longer assumed. In the stillness of rural evenings, every sound became suspect, every shadow a potential intruder. Frustration toward law enforcement deepened as trust eroded. Each unanswered question pressed against the patience of the community. If police could not protect 5 women across decades, what assurance remained for ordinary citizens? The failure to deliver closure transformed grief into anger and fear into resentment. Inside the police force, the tension was mirrored. Theories multiplied, but remained castles in the air, structures without foundation. Some investigators clung to the idea of a local killer, while others pointed toward drifters or military personnel passing through. Without tangible evidence, every theory became a fragile projection. Over time, silence grew heavier. The case shifted from headline to memory, whispered about in classrooms, retold in late-night conversations, or recalled by aging detectives as a scar on their professional record. What began as a tragedy gradually became folklore, part of Ontario's dark undercurrent. Yet folklore does not provide closure. The family of the victim remained suspended in uncertainty, their grief denied resolution, their loved one's absence sharpened by every passing year. Decades later, a technological revolution reopened the case. Investigative Genetic Genealogy, or IGG, became the tool that pierced through the silence. DNA recovered from the original crime scene, once useless, was re-examined with 21st-century precision. Technicians extracted a genetic profile and uploaded it to genealogical databases. What emerged was not a name, but a network. Distant relatives, second cousins, fragments of family trees. Investigators worked backward, reconstructing branches until they identified a line that pointed directly toward a suspect. Forensic genealogy reframed the timeline. Where the original investigation had been paralyzed by uncertainty, IGG introduced clarity. The suspect, long hidden, could now be linked through bloodlines, through the quiet inheritance written into every cell. It was science meeting memory, biology meeting justice. When police announced the breakthrough, it was both vindication and reckoning. The silence of 45 years fractured under the weight of a name, and the myth of the faceless killer gave way to a man whose identity could finally be spoken aloud. For the community, the revelation brought both relief and unease. Relief, as closure had finally come. Unease, because the killer had lived unnoticed among them all along. Justice delayed did not erase the crime, it deepened its shadow. Between silence and truth, myth and reality, the Ontario murder transformed from mystery into memory, haunting the community for nearly 50 years. When the case file was reopened after more than 4 decades, it was not only the identity of the suspect that emerged, but also a psychological portrait that had long been hidden. Criminal profilers began to piece together the fragments of his mindset, and what surfaced was not a picture of impulsive violence but of calculated obsession. The killer's mindset suggested layers of compulsion, control, and an insatiable need to dominate. Each action was deliberate, every choice echoing a deeper fracture in the mind. The behavioral patterns reconstructed from the evidence revealed chilling consistency. From the victim selection to the method of attack, the acts carried a signature. This was not chance. This was ritual. In forensic psychology, such repetition often signals that the perpetrator is not merely committing crimes, but attempting to exert order over chaos, to inscribe his presence into the world through destruction. It leads us to a question that still lingers. What early wounds gave birth to this darkness? Trauma psychology has long suggested that killers often emerge from histories scarred by neglect, violence, or abandonment. These formative experiences can fracture the development of empathy, replacing it with fear, rage, or a hollow craving for power. The suspect in this Ontario case, according to many experts, may have carried such wounds. Some theorize that his life was marked by instability, perhaps even humiliation. Others speculated that his crimes were the only arena where he felt mastery. In seizing control of another human life, he was silencing his own powerlessness. The question of motive remains elusive. Was it a grim assertion of control, a perverse claim over the victim's autonomy? Or was it fueled by rage, a way to punish someone who echoed past grievances? Perhaps it was something even darker, violence enacted for its own sake, the chilling thrill of determining another's fate. Psychology can suggest possibilities, trace patterns, and offer insight, yet it cannot restore the precise truth. That silence endures, dense and oppressive, resisting explanation, heavier than any confession could ever be, leaving the human mind to grapple with a mystery that may never be solved. What is undeniable is that the crime's impact reached far beyond the victim. One act of violence altered the life of an entire community. For decades, families in the small Ontario town lived under a cloud of suspicion and anxiety. Parents warned their children to stick together, to be wary even of familiar faces. Neighbors watched one another with quiet distrust, and ordinary routines were tinged with fear. Safety became fragile, almost imaginary, easily disrupted by the memory of that singular, horrific event. In this way, the crime did more than take a life. It rewrote the community's social fabric, leaving a lasting imprint of unease on daily existence. For the victim's family, the reopening of the case offered both closure and renewed grief. Justice, delayed by 45 years, can never truly feel like justice. Naming the suspect did not restore what was lost. The parents who carried the weight of absence for decades may never hear the answers they longed for. Siblings, who grew up with an empty chair at the table, were forced once again to face the permanence of their loss. Death is final, but its echoes extend across lifetimes. On a societal level, the case demonstrated both the resilience and the limitations of justice. For decades, police theories clashed, evidence was overlooked, and the trail grew cold. Only with the advent of investigative genetic genealogy did the truth begin to surface. DNA linked across family trees revealed what human memory and flawed procedure could not. Yet this breakthrough also underscored a grim reality. Sometimes justice does not arrive in time to heal. The law can name, but it cannot restore. Experts in victimology describe such delays as a form of secondary trauma. The family and the town suffered not only from the original violence, but also from the gradual erosion of hope over decades. Each unresolved year deepened their pain, embedding fear and uncertainty into daily life. When the suspect was finally identified, the revelation brought little solace. Too much time had passed for justice to truly redress the harm. The delay had allowed silence to claim its own toll, turning absence into a form of suffering that lingered long after the crime, leaving wounds that could never fully heal. In cultural memory, the case became more than a crime. It became a symbol. Media coverage over the years had painted the killer as a faceless shadow haunting rural Ontario. By the time the name was finally known, the image of the killer as a spectre of fear had already taken root. He was no longer only a man, but an embodiment of the violence that lurks beneath ordinary life. His unmasking did not dispel that shadow. It only gave it a human face. The enduring lesson of this case extends beyond crime and investigation. It lies in the weight of silence. For 45 years, silence dominated, muting the victim's voice, stifling the family's questions, and suppressing the community's longing for answers. This pervasive quiet became a subtle, insidious form of violence, shaping lives long before the truth surfaced. When the facts finally emerged, they did not undo decades of hushed suffering. Instead, they revealed the heavy toll that silence had exacted. The absence of words, acknowledgement, and justice left scars that lingered, showing how unspoken truths can wound as profoundly as any direct act, leaving a community to reckon with both crime and neglect. In the end, the file may be marked as solved, yet the echoes continue. The question, why did he do it, has no final answer, and perhaps never will. No conviction or revelation can fully illuminate the darkness of a fractured human mind. And so the case remains more than a resolution. It remains a reminder. The past cannot be undone. The silence cannot be reversed. And some mysteries, even when named, still hold their shadows. This cold case reminds us that time does not erase truth. It only buries it, until patience and science bring it back to light. Investigative genetic genealogy has proven to be a true game-changer, reopening doors that once seemed forever closed, and giving voice to victims long silenced. Yet with every breakthrough, we are also confronted with something unsettling. Fear is a mirror. When we gaze into it, do we see only the shadow of a killer, or do we also catch a glimpse of the darkness we all carry inside? And if you found tonight's episode meaningful, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe for more stories from the depths of the human psyche. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.
References 1. Grider, K. 2021. Cold Case Investigations. HarperCollins. 2. Murphy, E. 2018. Forensic DNA and the Law. Oxford University Press. 3. Thompson, W. 2020. Unsolved Murders and Genetic Clues. Routledge.